Hi everyone. I'm going to read chapter 14 of Lavina. This is called Chinatown. At last Lavina began to see the first signs of a California spring. The rain stopped, the sun shone mildly, plants blossomed everywhere, but the fruit trees delighted Lavina most. Their delicate petals burst from bare brown twigs. First came the pink cherry and plum trees, and then, in froths of white, the other plums and apples and the pears. They looked like enormous bouquets scattered throughout the streets of Santa Cruz. It's kind of what's happening right now. Cousin Maud arranged some of the flowering branches in tall china jars and placed them around the house. "There, isn't that artistic?" she sighed. Then she went to the piano and sang romantic songs, including Juanita, Nita Juanita, ask the soul if we should part, and Sweet Adeline, and the girls' favorite, Come Away With Me, Lucille, in Merry Oldsmobile. Senor Caruso, the canary, thrilled along with her. Cousin Maud seemed very cheerful these days. She had changed the way she did her hair, and she hardly ever used her ear trumpet. However, Aggie was often in a sour mood and spent hours playing with her dolls by herself. Lavina didn't mind, for she much preferred Susan and Bertie as playmates. And when she was feeling homesick, it always cheered her up to visit them. Susan's father was tall, loose-limbed, funny, and hound-doggy like Susan, while Mrs. Pitts loved what she called culture, capitalizing the word with the tone of her voice. She belonged to a ladies' literary club, and the Pitts house was always littered with pictures, newspapers, and books. The Pitts owned a Victrola with a large collection of records, including some of the daring new ragtime songs. But currently, Mrs. Pitts was all agog over grand opera and Italian arias poured from the Victrola's flower-shaped horn. So it's kind of like a record player. The great Italian tenor Enrico Caruso was coming to sing in San Francisco at Easter time, and Mrs. Pitts had set her heart on hearing him. "It's the chance of a lifetime!" she exclaimed. Susan was eager to go too. Her brother absolutely refused. "Of course, Sarah Bernhardt would be even better," Susan told Lavina and Bertie. "I'd die to see divine Sarah." "But you couldn't see her if you were dead." Bertie's dimples flickered in her circular cheeks. Bertie and her parents also had tickets. Mrs. Pitts had persuaded Mrs. Lee, who sang in a church choir and who, besides, was a doting mother to her large brood of children, that all musical people should hear the great Caruso. Mr. Lee, who couldn't carry a tune, was said to have his doubts about Italian singers, but he, too, was an indulgent parent. Lavina knew that there was no use wanting what she couldn't have. "Oh, well, Susan will act it all out for me afterward," she thought. "That will be almost as good, and funnier." One Saturday in March, Aunt Agnes came down to breakfast in her walking suit and announced, "I must go to Watsonville on business today, children. Who would like to come with me?" "Oh, dear," said Cousin Maud, "I can't. I have to give Freddie his lesson." Aggie shook her head vigorously. "No, business is boring, and so is the ride." "Aggie, tell Grandma no thank you nicely," said her mother. "No thank you, Grandma." "How about you, Lavina?" asked Aunt Agnes. "Yes, please," said Lavina. "May I bring my doll?" "Certainly," said her aunt, "and don't forget a clean handkerchief." "Yes, ma'am." They took a cab to Watsonville, where they were met by a Chinese man with a buggy. "This is Mr. Atoy," said Aunt Agnes. "My niece, Lavina." Mr. Atoy bowed low, and Lavina, in great confusion, bowed back. "Mr. Atoy will drive. He is my interpreter," Aunt Agnes explained. "What could this business be?" Lavina longed to ask questions, even though she knew that children should be seen and not heard. Watsonville, she thought, looking around. Here I stood all by myself. For an instant it seemed like yesterday. Lavina shuddered and hugged Princess Parizade tightly. The buggy passed through the little town, and soon they were surrounded by blooming orchards. Lavina thought it looked like fairyland, too pretty to be true. Then they rounded a bend in the road and stopped in front of a cluster of small buildings. "Where are we?" wondered Lavina. Smoke rose from the chimneys, but she saw no people at all. Mr. Atoy hitched his horse to a tree and knocked upon the nearest door, which was opened by a Chinese woman with a baby in her arms. They spoke. He gestured toward the buggy, and immediately dozens of Chinese people poured from the houses, men with long pigtails that hung down below their hats, women in sandals and soft trousers, and many children, all chattering at once and pointing. Lavina was certain that they were pointing at her. "What is this?" she asked herself, half frightened. "This is Chinatown," said her aunt calmly. The storm of voices rose even higher. Mr. Atoy waved his arms and talked back. "I own it," added Aunt Agnes. "This is the day I collect the rent." Mr. Atoy came over to the buggy. "They are worried because there are two of you. They tell me to say that they will only pay you, Mrs. Scott, and not Missy. They will only pay once." "Yes, of course," said Aunt Agnes. Lavina followed her aunt slowly from door to door as the tenants placed the rent money in her hands. The insides of the cabins were dark, and she noticed strange smells of cooking and of incense. Sticks of incense set beside 2 or 3 shriveled oranges smoldered in front of the little household altars. The children stared at her, and she stared back. While they were driving back to Watsonville, Lavina noticed several Chinese children at work in the fields and orchards. Aunt Agnes deposited her bag of money in the bank, and then Mr. Atoy helped them into a cab again and bowed low as they drove away. Meanwhile, Lavina was thoughtful. Aunt Agnes sank into her seat with a grateful sigh. "I have to make this trip every month," she explained. "They won't pay anybody but me." "So that's how you get your money, Aunt Agnes?" Her aunt looked at her searchingly through her spectacles. "Some of it. I also own orchards and strawberry fields. I inherited the property when my husband died many years ago." "I don't have any money." "Children don't need money, my dear." Lavina did not like to contradict Aunt Agnes, so she said nothing, but carefully wrapped one of the princess's pearls around her own finger. Dolls cost money, just like clothes and railroad tickets, she knew. She thought of the children at work in the fields. "Parents take care of the money," said Aunt Agnes. "Father doesn't have much," said Lavina. Now it was Aunt Agnes's turn to be silent. "And there was a flood at the ranch, and he has hurt his hand. I wish he would write to me." "I'll send him a letter tomorrow," said Aunt Agnes. "Douglas was always my favorite brother." "So when you were children, you never quarreled?" asked Lavina. Her aunt laughed. "No, child, I cannot say that. All brothers and sisters have their disagreements." A sad expression crossed her face. "Sometimes this world is a bad place. We must hope for a better world to come, I suppose, but nothing is more important than our families. Blood is thicker than water. We're all Cummings, aren't we?" She touched Lavina's cheek with her gloved hand. "I would like to see Douglas again. You know that he used to live here?" Lavina nodded. "Why did he leave?" Aunt Agnes looked away, and again her face became troubled. "It was after his first wife died. You did know he was married before." Lavina was stunned. "No, I didn't." Lavina did not dare to ask most of the questions that filled her mind. Why had father never told them? What other secrets did he have? What stories had he never told? "After she died, he went away. To the Indian wars, the gold fields, to Tombstone, of all the dreadful places for a decent Christian to live. But then he settled down again, and you know the rest of it, child." Suddenly, Lavina remembered the smell of the saloon in Tucson. "I suppose he didn't like to tell you about the sad memories. Why, here we are in Santa Cruz again. Good gracious sake, what a short journey that was." Something extremely surprising was parked in front of 19 Vine Street. "What on earth?" exclaimed Aunt Agnes, stepping down from the cab. "It's an automobile," said Lavina, "but whose?" "No one whom I know has an automobile," said Aunt Agnes majestically. Cousin Maud whisked open the front door. "It belongs to Mr. Moberly, Mother." Behind her they caught a glimpse of Mr. Moberly's mustache. "Call me Frank," he said. "It's Frank," said Cousin Maud, laughing. Freddie squeezed past her and ran towards the street. "It's an Oldsmobile," he said. "Isn't it just dandy?" They gathered around it, even Aggie and Aunt Agnes, to admire its gleaming black paint and mechanical marvels. "Curved dashboard, you see," Mr. Moberly pointed out, "and this is how you steer her. Mr. Moberly rotated the steering wheel, and they all watched the front tires twist from side to side. "Who wants a ride?" he asked. "Not today, thank you," said Aunt Agnes. "I believe I'm too old for this." Me," shouted Freddie. "I would," said Lavina. "I guess so," said Aggie. "Let's all go," said Mr. Moberly. "Can I drive, Dad?" "No, son. In the back you go." The auto was really only a two-seater, a runabout, Mr. Moberly called it, so he and Cousin Maud sat in front, and the children squeezed behind the seat. With a pop and a lurch, they set off down the hill. Lavina noticed that the automobile glided more smoothly and evenly than a wagon or a carriage once it built up speed. Stops and starts were still quite jerky. But there was no connection with another living being, as there always was with a horse. On Chummy's friendly, sweaty back, she felt that her own legs were long and strong and that her 4 feet were hard. Lavina stared at Vine Street without seeing it, lost in a dream. In the dream, she rose before dawn and slipped down to the corral. Chummy came to meet her and took the bite like a carrot. Took the bit like a carrot. She stood on a rock, grabbed a handful of his mane, and rode off bareback towards the bosque. A tall, bulky figure stood at the end of the trail. "Father," she called, kicking Chummy into a lope. Mr. Moberly began to sing, "Come away with me, Lucille." His mustache flapped in the breeze. "You have a nice bass voice, Frank," Cousin Maud told him as they spun along the street faster and faster. In spite of the noise of the Oldsmobile, she seemed to hear him perfectly. "Really, I need one of those new automobile veils to keep my hair in place." "Get one, and I'll take you for a long ride, Maud," he said. "Oh." "I didn't touch her." "He so did. Mind your manners, children," said Cousin Maud, but she never looked back. And that was chapter 13. We're going to stop there for today. Chapter 15 is Magic, Black and White. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And I'll be back for another one tomorrow. Bye.